In February 2019, a story occurred in Kirov that still remains one of the most harrowing in the region's crime chronicle. 21-year-old Maria Plenkina locked her 3-year-old daughter, Kristina, in an apartment on Shorsa Street, turned the key, and left for an entire week. And when the grandmother came on February 20th to congratulate her granddaughter on her birthday and opened the door with her own key, it was as quiet inside as it should never be in an apartment where a little human lives. She found Kristina on the sofa, without clothes, already showing no signs of life. The apartment looked as if no adult had been there for a very long time. Laundry detergent was scattered on the floor. Toys and trash were strewn everywhere. The water taps were shut off, and there was no food or water within reach. The grandmother called an ambulance, though she already understood that help was no longer needed. Investigators arrived next, and the initial inspection revealed an important detail. The apartment was locked from the inside with a key, with no signs of forced entry and no traces of any outsiders. Only one question arose. Where had the mother been all this time? A criminal case was opened that same day, initially just based on the discovery, but within a few hours, it became clear that this was not an accident. The autopsy established a preliminary cause: dehydration, starvation, and hypothermia. Kristina had spent several days in that locked apartment, completely alone, without water, without food, and with the heating turned off. Experts also found traces of laundry detergent in her system. Apparently, out of hunger, she had tried to eat the only thing she could find. On February 20th, Kristina was supposed to turn 3. Instead of a celebration, an inspection report. Investigators now had to find the mother and find out where she had been all those days. On the morning of February 20th, Maria called herself. It wasn't the grandmother calling her. It was her calling the grandmother. And she asked only one thing. When does the workday end? Yulia Plenkina would later be unable to explain exactly what had alerted her then. Maybe the intonation. Maybe the very fact of the question. Because her daughter rarely interested herself in her schedule. Or maybe it was that for the entire week, Maria had not once let her granddaughter take the phone, though that had never happened before. She always answered the same thing. Everything is fine. We're home. Everything is good. So, the grandmother did not wait for the end of her shift. She called the police and an ambulance to the house on Shorsa, and then went there herself. The apartment door was locked, and inside was a silence that immediately felt unsettling. When they opened it, the first thing that caught the eye was the chaos. The temperature in the apartment was at 15 degrees Celsius, cold and empty. The medics recorded what the grandmother apparently had already understood over the phone. And the police began to work. The investigative team began their inspection, and what they saw gradually formed a very heavy picture. On the kitchen table stood 2 empty yogurt bottles, and nothing else. The refrigerator also turned out to be empty. As Maria would later say during interrogation, she left her daughter yogurt, a prepared chicken, and a pack of sausages, deciding that this would be enough for 8 days. She had turned off the water valves deliberately, because Kristina sometimes opened the taps, and they had once flooded the neighbors. Maria did not want that to happen again, so not a drop of water remained in the apartment. Not in the tap, not in the kettle, not in a glass. She locked the door with a key from the outside. No visible injuries were found on Christina, no bruises or abrasions. But when they recorded her weight, the figure stopped everyone in their tracks. 8.5 kilograms, while the norm for a 3-year-old is 13 to 14. Christina weighed almost half as much as she should have, and the medics noted signs of extreme emaciation in the report. This meant only one thing. She had been starving not only during this week, but for a long time. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination read, multi-organ failure. The body failed gradually, first the kidneys, then the liver, then everything else. This process was triggered not by one factor, but by 3 at once: dehydration, starvation, and hypothermia. Each of them is agonizing on its own, and together they became a death sentence. She wasn't beaten, strangled, or poisoned. No traces of poisoning from the laundry detergent were found in her blood either. She was simply left alone, without water, without food, in a cold apartment, and she faded away over several days. On the night between February 16th and 17th, neighbors heard crying. But Christina had cried before, so no one paid it any mind. But on the night between the 17th and 18th, there was already silence. The court would later establish that this was likely when it all ended. When the door was opened on the 20th, signs of decomposition were already noticeable. 3 days, maybe 4, that is how long she fought. A body at that age is resilient, even if weakened. And Christina had previously had a weak heart, anemia, and neurological problems. The mother had stopped taking her to doctors when the daughter turned 8 months old. Now every body has its limit. And here is what is important to understand. The apartment of the friend where Maria spent this entire week was a 15-minute walk away. She could have returned at any moment, literally every day. At trial, she was asked directly, "Why didn't you return?" And she replied, "I don't know. I wanted to come in the morning, and I didn't come. I wanted to return every day, but I didn't return." According to her, she was feeling bad then because of a breakup with a partner. She didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to return to where her daughter was waiting. She did not return once in 7 days. But at the same time, twice during that period, she took money from her mother allegedly for her granddaughter's food, about 2,000 rubles. She spent it in clubs. The first 2 days were likely the easiest. A body at that age is capable of stretching meager reserves for some time, but definitely not for a week. By the 3rd day, the food ran out, and the water even earlier. Christina turned the tap handles, but nothing happened, and at 3 years old, it is impossible to understand why water isn't flowing, and even more impossible to find the valves. And so, traces remained throughout the apartment of how she searched. Open cabinets. She crawled, trying to find something edible, something drinkable. In the bathroom, she found laundry detergent, white, looking like something that could be put in the mouth. By the 4th or 5th day, the cold was added. February. The heating in the apartment worked poorly, or not at all. For an adult, this is just unpleasant. But for an emaciated and dehydrated body at that age, it is critical. The fact that Christina was found without clothes was no accident. During severe hypothermia, a paradoxical reaction occurs. The person feels hot and begins to undress. This is called paradoxical undressing and signifies the final stage before losing consciousness. Maria left, leaving the small window vents open. Likely she didn't think, or she thought, but about something else. So it wouldn't be stuffy for ventilation. February, but the apartment could have heated up. It doesn't matter. What matters is something else. The vents remained open all that time. And Christina understood this. She climbed onto the windowsill at her 3 years of age, reached for her toys, and threw them down, one after another, through the vent onto the street. This was not a game. It was her only connection to the outside world. Below, directly under the apartment, was a shop. The shopkeepers saw toys falling from above and heard someone crying upstairs, but they didn't pay any attention to it. Children cry for all sorts of reasons, it happens. And the toys, maybe someone dropped them or was being naughty, all sorts of things happen. No one went up. No one called. No one asked. The grandmother would later say in court, if she had been told then that her granddaughter was throwing toys out the window, she would have alerted both the police and social services. But no one told her, and Christina continued to throw them, while she had strength, while she could climb onto the windowsill. Then she stopped. The investigation questioned the residents of the house on Shorsa, and the result was not so much shocking as it was quite predictable. The family had lived there for about 4 years. They almost never communicated with neighbors. Maria sometimes smoked in the stairwell, and that's when they would say hello. A young mother, a very young daughter. No one noticed anything suspicious. And here is what is important. The family was not registered as troubled. The children's ombudsman for the Kirov region, Vladimir Shabardin, confirmed that no signals had been sent to the guardianship authorities. No complaints, no inspections, nothing at all. But there was another signal, quiet and unnoticed. Christina stopped appearing at the clinic. From birth until 8 months, she had regular checkups, and after that, not once. More than 2 years without any medical supervision, not a single vaccination, not a single visit to a pediatrician. After the tragedy, the prosecutor's office conducted an audit and opened a case for negligence. They detained the head of clinic number 7, Tamara Permiakova, but she was released after 3 days because no grounds for charges were found. In protest, the doctors of the Children's Diagnostic Center wrote resignation letters. And so, the system turned out not to be at fault. There are no guilty parties, so to speak, except for the mother. At her friend Anastasia Kuprina's, Maria felt at home. Her toothbrush was there, her pajamas hung there, and she often stayed overnight even before this week. From February 13th to 20th, Maria lived, essentially, a normal life. She helped her friend move because she was changing apartments, went to cafes with her, went to clubs, and looked for work. In 2018, she worked at a hookah bar on Moskovskaya Street, but by February, she was unemployed. She went to a hairdresser, showed the stylist photos of her daughter, and talked about Christina. And when she was asked who the daughter was with now, the answers changed every time. With the grandmother, with a friend, with the godmother. Everything is fine. She is being looked after. Anastasia Kuprina did not know that Christina was actually alone. In court, she would say that Maria assured her every time that her daughter was supervised, and there was simply no reason not to believe her. Their outings were paid for by the friend, and Maria brought food to her house with the money received from her mother. Clubs, taxis, alcohol, all at Anastasia's expense. Plenkina's friends told the investigation something else. Maria had repeatedly wondered aloud. Maybe she should give Christina to an orphanage? Not once. Not as a joke. She seriously reflected on it. Anastasia Kuprina would say in court, there was nothing unusual in Maria's behavior. And this is important. Not she was nervous, not something was wrong. Specifically, nothing unusual. A normal week, normal conversations. A normal friend who was going through a breakup and looking for work. Maria lied easily, one might say, professionally, without a single seam. To her mother, that the daughter was fine. To her friend, that the daughter was being looked after. To the hairdresser, that everything was good. To acquaintances in the club, that the daughter was with her grandmother. To each their own version, and not a single slip-up. But the investigation discovered an oddity. 2 nights out of 7, Maria did not stay at her friend's house. She simply disappeared. And where to is unknown. In court, she suddenly stated that there was a man, a secret one, older than her, and she hid him from everyone because her mother would have been against it. Allegedly, she spent one of the nights out of town with him. The problem is that cellular operator data showed she never left the city. Another lie or another secret. Journalist Ivan Shvetsov, who was present at the trial, later wrote, "She is often caught in lies. She changes her testimony. In her memories, more and more food appears that she supposedly left for her daughter." So, the versions multiplied, but the facts did not. The only fact that did not change, 7 days, not a single call home, not a single attempt to check. 2 days after the discovery, the arrest, investigators were prepared for hysteria, for tears, for denial, for attempts to explain, justify, or shift the blame onto someone else. But none of that happened. Maria sat calmly, hands on her knees, voice steady. She answered to the point. Yes, she left. Yes, she locked the door. Yes, she understood the daughter was alone. During interrogation, she partially admitted guilt and said she did not want such an outcome. She just left and did not return. The investigation ordered a comprehensive psychological and psychiatric evaluation, and the conclusion was later read out in court. The wording was dry and medical. Infantile, selfish, prone to self-justification, blames others for her own problems, empathy and compassion for loved ones, absent. And the main thing, sane. No dementia, no mental disorders, fully capable of realizing the consequences of her actions. This was not a disease, not a delusion, not a heat of passion. She understood what she was doing. Alexei gave an interview to Ren TV 2 days after what had happened became known. He said that at first he did not recognize his daughter, then he did, and then he left, a month after the birth. Why? According to him, the desire was mutual. Did he help after that? No, he did not help. He moved to St. Petersburg and last saw Christina in 2016, when she was less than a year old. 3 years, not a single meeting. He explained this by saying he wanted to come in November 2018. But Maria did not let him see his daughter. Every time he asked for a meeting, she answered the same. You have your life. We have ours. Everything is fine with us. He wanted to take Christina to Petersburg for good, to raise her himself. Maria refused and threatened. If he took her, she would file a police report for kidnapping. It turns out to be a paradox. She did not want to raise her, but at the same time, she would not give her to either the father or the state. Why is unclear. And here is what is important. The last correspondence with Maria is dated the evening of February 17th. He suggested she come to Petersburg when she had time, and she refused. At that moment, Christina was still alive, and, likely, it was the last or second to last day. On Alexei's VKontakte page, there was not a single mention of his daughter. The status read, "Nishtyak, nishtyak." Everything's cool. And so, Maria was left alone at 18. Without a husband, without a job, without an education. She never finished her studies at the Culinary Technical School to become a pastry chef. The only source of money was her mother. Julia Plenkina supported both her daughter and granddaughter completely. She provided money for food, clothes, and the apartment. The three of them lived together until Christina was about a year old. Then another scandal broke out, and Julia moved out. Not to another apartment, but to a dormitory. But she didn't disappear. She called every day, visited 2 or 3 times a week, and gave money, the very money that Maria later spent in clubs. At the trial, Maria's lawyer presented a different version of this story. According to her, after the move, the grandmother practically stopped appearing. To request to babysit her granddaughter, she would reply, "You gave birth, you deal with it." And she refused to hold the child. "She's so small, I'm afraid." She stayed with Christina once, and never again. At the same time, she gave money regularly for the granddaughter's food. Maria did not work, scraping by with odd jobs in clubs and cafes. It was a strange construction. Complete financial dependence alongside an almost total emotional rupture. Julia Plenkina herself later told journalists, "I didn't notice anything suspicious in my daughter's behavior. If it was a deception, it was for 3 years. I don't know." Alexei, in a conversation with the 360 TV channel, recalled that Maria used to be completely different, thrifty and domestic. She stayed at home, her friends came to see her, rather than her disappearing somewhere. I don't know what happened in her life, what changed. Something broke, or someone broke it. This was not Maria Plenkina's first conviction. Even before the birth of her daughter, she had been processed under an article for credit fraud. Article 115.1 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. A classic scheme. She applied for loans using false information about her income and place of employment, received the money, and disappeared. The grandmother later told journalists that the conviction was one of the signs of her daughter's antisocial behavior. But back then, she didn't attach much significance to it. Now, a second conviction, and no longer about money. And here is what's interesting. During the investigation, Maria tried to use the same method that had worked before, manipulation. She claimed she didn't return home because voices in her head demanded it, attempting to portray a psychiatric disorder. It didn't work. Then she changed tactics. She partially admitted guilt and said she loved her daughter. Her testimony kept changing. As soon as one version fell away, another appeared. Investigators noted that she was adapting, searching for an explanation that would be accepted. So, the system she was used to using in her own interests did not yield this time. January 17, 2020, Kirov Regional Court. Almost a year has passed since the tragedy. In the courtroom, journalists, cameras, microphones, a case the whole city knew. At the house on Shorsa Street, people still bring flowers and toys, and Kirov residents call the place the grave. Maria Plenkina sat in the dock, calm and detached. The judge read the materials. Photographs of the apartment, the turned-off valves, Christina's condition at the moment of discovery. Prosecutor Anna Kravitz demanded 13 years and 3 months in a general regime colony, plus a fine, plus restriction of freedom after release. The charge: causing the death of a minor with extreme cruelty. Character references from school and technical college were read. Nothing special. An ordinary girl, an ordinary student. Then came the data about the family, and that was when it was first mentioned. Maria's own father had been in prison. The mother had moved to a dormitory. Christina's father had moved to another city. Maria's father was behind bars. Neighbors heard crying and didn't call the police. Doctors hadn't seen Christina for 2 years and didn't raise the alarm. The judge listed everyone who could have intervened and didn't. Plenkina's lawyer did not attend the sentencing. Maria was given the floor. She began to speak, but her speech immediately became incoherent and confused. She jumped from thought to thought, called her daughter Christusha, and cried. I admit my guilt because I left my daughter alone. I didn't want this for her. There was no personal enmity. I loved her very much and did everything so she had everything. I cared for her. The prosecutor asked, "Why didn't you return?" She didn't answer. She couldn't formulate it. She was asked key questions. How could you leave your daughter without water? Why were you gone for 8 days? In whose care was Christina left? And she did not give a coherent answer to a single one. Those listening in the hall looked at each other, and someone said aloud, "She's crying because she's afraid for her own life." So, there were tears, but there was no explanation. After Maria's testimony, the lawyer was given the floor. The defender tried to do what the defendant herself could not: explain. Maria broke from material and domestic hardships. That is why she says she couldn't return. The lawyer read out mitigating circumstances. Maria's father died when she was still small, and her mother paid little attention to her after that. Early sexual relations, pregnancy at 17. When Maria told her mother about the pregnancy, she replied, "You need to have an abortion," without explanation. Plenkina was effectively left alone with her daughter, without support. There was no financial help from the father. The mother evaded caring for the granddaughter. The women from Kirov in the hall were quietly indignant. I do not agree with the prosecutor that Maria had a negative attitude toward her daughter. The lawyer finished and requested the minimum sentence. At that point, the judge interrupted her. Plenkina initially denied the charge under Article 105. Have you coordinated your position with your client? The lawyer hesitated. Yes. She admits the objective side of the consequences of her actions, but without intent, with extreme cruelty. The judge announced a 15-minute break to coordinate the defense's position with the client. A rare moment. Even the lawyer, it seemed, did not fully understand exactly what she was defending. And here is what the expert's conclusion means. Everything she did in her right mind. She turned off the water. She understood why. She left for a week. She knew whom she was leaving. She didn't return. She realized the consequences. The experts did not record a disease. They recorded a personality, a person who only knows how to love themselves, who does not feel the pain of others, who will always find someone to blame, and it will be anyone but themselves. But that is not a diagnosis. That is character. And character is not a mitigating circumstance. Psychiatrists have long studied such mothers. British psychotherapist Anne Motts, an expert in forensic psychology, describes them as women who perceive their own daughters and sons not as separate people, but as extensions of themselves. A narcissistic extension, an object, a function. Another specialist, Estela Weldon, worked for years with mothers who caused harm to their loved ones. And her conclusion sounds terrifying. For such women, violence against their own offspring is a symbolic attack on their own mother's body. Revenge, a settling of scores. And then everything begins to fall into place. For Maria, Christina was never a living person with needs. She was an accessory, a background for photographs, a reason to receive money from the grandmother, a tool for manipulation with the father. She didn't give her up, because she was her property, not a person, a thing. When the thing became a hindrance, Maria did not do what she is accused of in the conventional sense. She simply switched the daughter out of her consciousness. She stopped thinking about her, literally. For 7 days, she lived her own life, and Christina did not exist in her head as a living being that could wither away. The birthday post was not cynicism or madness. It was a performance. She wasn't congratulating her daughter. She was demonstrating the image of a good mother to the world. The audience is more important than reality. And the grandmother, finding Christina on her birthday. Perhaps that was not an accident. There was a feud between Maria and her own mother. Conflicts, moving out, scandals. The blow was meant to hit the grandmother. The granddaughter became a weapon in this war. On March 23, 2020, the Fourth Court of Appeals in Nizhny Novgorod considered the defense's appeal. The sentence was upheld. 13 years in a general regime colony. Maria Plenkina will be released at approximately 35 years old. Christina remained 3 forever. She threw toys out the window. She hoped someone would see. No one saw.